The night Nate showed up at my door, I realized that some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to want what they've already chosen. My name is David. I'm 41. I restore old furniture for a living, mostly mid-century pieces that people inherit and don't know what to do with. I work out of a rented workshop near the harbor, and I live alone in a narrow house with blue shutters that I bought 3 years ago after my engagement fell apart. The breakup wasn't dramatic. Claire and I had simply run out of things to say to each other that weren't about logistics. She moved to Portland for work. I stayed. We spoke twice after that, both times about forwarding mail. It was a Friday in late October when everything changed. I had spent the evening sanding down a walnut credenza, and my hands still smelled like tongue oil when I got home a little past 9. The air was cold enough to see your breath. I made coffee, turned on the kitchen lamp, and was halfway through reading an article about Danish joinery when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Nate was standing on my porch with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his breath fogging in the yellow light from the street lamp. He looked thinner than I remembered, and his eyes were red in a way that made it clear he'd been drinking. "David," he said quietly. "Nate." We stared at each other for a moment. Nate had been Claire's best friend since college. I'd met him a dozen times over the years, mostly at dinners where he sat across from me and made sharp observations about people we both knew. He was a graphic designer, thoughtful in a way that made you feel like he was always holding something back. "I know it's late," he said. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked past me into the kitchen, and I noticed he was gripping his phone too tightly. I shut the door and leaned against the counter. The coffee pot hissed softly behind me. "You want coffee?" I asked. "No." He turned to face me. "I need to tell you something, and I need to say it before I lose my nerve." I waited. "Claire made a mistake," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "Leaving you. She knows it. She told me 2 weeks ago that she thinks about you all the time, that she wonders if she gave up too easily." I didn't say anything. Rain started tapping against the kitchen window. Nate took a breath. "But I won't." "You won't what?" "Make that mistake." He looked at me directly now. "I've been in love with you since the dinner at Mark's place 2 years ago. You fixed his sink in the middle of the meal and didn't make a thing out of it. You just did it and came back to the table like it was nothing, and I sat there thinking, this is the kind of person I want. Not the idea of someone, not the version someone performs at parties. Just this." The room went very quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat. "You were with Claire," I said carefully. "I was her friend. I still am. But you were always off limits, and I told myself that was fine. I told myself a lot of things." He set his phone down on the counter. "Then she called me last week and said she wanted to reach out to you, to try again. And I realized I couldn't let that happen without telling you the truth first." I looked at him for a long moment. He wasn't swaying, but his hands were shaking slightly. "You're drunk," I said. "I'm terrified," he corrected. "The drunk part just made it possible to get in the car." I poured him a cup of coffee anyway and slid it across the counter. He wrapped both hands around it but didn't drink. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because if Claire shows up here and you say yes, I'll have to live the rest of my life knowing I never even tried." He finally took a sip. "And because you deserve to know that someone sees you. Really sees you. Not the stable guy. Not the one who fixes things. You." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd spent 3 years thinking of myself as someone who had been left, and here was Nate, standing in my kitchen, rewriting the entire narrative. "I'm not asking you for anything," he added quickly. "I just needed you to know." "Okay." "Okay?" "I heard you." I leaned back against the counter. "Now sit down before you fall down." He smiled faintly and took the chair by the window. I sat across from him. The coffee pot clicked off. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose gutter I'd been meaning to fix for a month. "Does Claire know you're here?" I asked. "No, and I'm not going to tell her." He stared into his mug. "This isn't about her. It's about me finally being honest." We sat there in silence for a while. I studied him in the low light. His hair was longer than it used to be, and there was a small scar near his jaw that I didn't remember. He looked tired, but there was something steady underneath the exhaustion. "You can't drive home like this," I said eventually. "I'll call a car. Or you can take the couch." He looked up, surprised. "You sure?" "I'm sure." I got him a blanket and a pillow from the hallway closet. He kicked off his shoes and stretched out on the couch with his jacket still on. I turned off the kitchen light and was about to head upstairs when he spoke again. "David?" "Yeah?" Thank you for not throwing me out." "You didn't do anything worth throwing you out for." I went upstairs, but I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers and listened to the rain, replaying everything he'd said. By the time the sky started to lighten, I still hadn't figured out what I felt. Confused, maybe? Flattered, definitely. Something else I didn't have a name for yet. When I came downstairs the next morning, Nate was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his jacket folded beside him. He'd made coffee. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning. I should go." He stood and picked up his jacket. "I'm sorry if I made things weird." "You didn't." He paused at the door. If you need space, I get it. But if you want to talk or just get coffee sometime, I'm around. Okay. He smiled, and for the first time since he'd shown up, he looked almost relaxed. Then he left. I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to the car, idling at the curb. He didn't look back. 3 days passed. I worked on the credenza, refinished a set of dining chairs, and tried not to think about Nate. I failed. On Tuesday evening, I texted him. Coffee tomorrow? He replied within a minute. Yes. Where? We met at a place near the marina called Fran's, a diner with mismatched chairs and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Nate was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. He was wearing a gray sweater and looked significantly less terrified than he had on Friday night. Hey, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Hey. We ordered coffee. The waitress brought it in heavy ceramic mugs and left without asking if we wanted food. So, Nate said, wrapping his hands around his mug the same way he had in my kitchen. How are you? Confused, I admitted, but not upset. That's better than I expected. You caught me off guard, I said. I didn't see it coming. I've been working very hard to make sure you wouldn't. He took a sip of coffee. For what it's worth, I didn't plan to tell you. I just couldn't not tell you anymore. When you said you felt this way since Mark's dinner, were you serious? Completely. He met my eyes. You spent 20 minutes under a sink so the rest of us could finish eating. And when you came back, your shirt was soaked, and Mark tried to make a joke about it, and you just said, it's water. Like it didn't matter. And I thought I would follow this man anywhere. I didn't know what to say to that. I looked out the window at the gray water and the boats rocking gently at the docks. I'm not good at this, I said finally. At what? Being seen. I turned back to him. Claire used to say I was emotionally efficient, that I solved problems instead of feeling them. That's not what I see. Then what do you see? He thought about it for a moment. Someone who's careful because he knows what it costs when things break. The rain started again, light and steady against the window. I realized my chest felt tight. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. What happens if this doesn't work? Then we tried, Nate said simply. And we'll know. Isn't that better than spending the rest of our lives wondering? I looked at him across the table, this man I'd known for years but never really looked at, and I realized he was right. Sometimes careful was just fear with better manners. Okay, I said. Okay, what? Let's try. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that changed his whole face. Yeah? Yeah. We stayed at Fran's for 2 more hours. We talked about work, about the furniture I was restoring, about the rebrand project he was finishing for a startup that sold overpriced oat milk. We talked about Claire briefly and agreed that whatever happened, we'd be honest with her. We talked about Mark, who would absolutely lose his mind when he found out. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Nate reached across the table and brushed his thumb against the back of my hand. Is this okay? He asked. Yeah. He left his hand there. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Coffee twice a week at Fran's, a walk along the harbor on a cold Sunday morning, a quiet dinner at my place where Nate cooked pasta and I told him stories about the worst furniture disasters I'd ever inherited. He laughed easily and he listened in a way that made me feel like every word mattered. But it wasn't all easy. One night in mid-November, we were sitting on my couch and I asked him what he'd told Claire. I told her I couldn't help her reach out to you, he said carefully. I didn't tell her why. She's going to find out eventually. I know. He looked at me. Does that bother you? I don't know yet. That's fair. 2 weeks later, it stopped being hypothetical. We ran into Claire at a gallery opening downtown. She was standing near a painting of a wrecked sailboat, holding a glass of white wine. And when she saw us together, her face went very still. She walked over slowly. David. Nate. Claire, I said. Her eyes moved between us, and I watched her put it together. Oh. Claire, Nate started. Don't. She held up a hand. Just don't. She turned and walked toward the door. Nate followed her. I stayed where I was because I didn't know what else to do. Through the window I could see them talking on the sidewalk. Claire's arms were crossed. Nate's hands were in his pockets. After a few minutes she wiped her eyes, said something I couldn't hear, and walked away. Nate came back inside. His face was pale. What did she say? I asked. That she felt blindsided. That she didn't think I was capable of this. Are you okay? I don't know. He looked at me. Are you? I don't know either. We left the gallery and walked to the car in silence. The drive back to my place felt longer than it should have. When we got inside, Nate sat on the couch and put his head in his hands. Maybe this was a mistake, he said quietly. I sat down beside him. Do you believe that? No. But I hurt someone I care about, and I don't know how to make that okay. You can't, I said. You can only be honest. Which you were. He looked at me. You're not angry? At you? No. At the situation? Maybe. I reached for his hand. But I'm not running. You're sure? I'm sure. He leaned into me, and I wrapped my arm around his shoulders. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing together in the quiet. A week later, Claire texted Nate, "Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop near her apartment. When he came back, he told me she'd apologized for her reaction, that she understood, even if it hurt, that she wanted both of us to be happy, even if it wasn't with her. She asked if it was serious, Nate said. "What did you tell her?" I said yes. I nodded slowly. "Is it?" He looked at me with something close to disbelief. "David, I told you I loved you the first night I showed up at your door. What do you think?" "I think I'm still catching up." "Then take your time." He stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, he stayed over. We fell asleep on the couch with the television on low, his head on my shoulder, my hand in his hair. When I woke up in the middle of the night, he was still there, breathing softly, and I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. By Christmas, we'd told Mark, who reacted exactly as predicted by yelling, "I knew it!" and immediately demanding to take credit as matchmaker despite having contributed nothing. We spent New Year's Eve at my place, cooking dinner and watching the neighbors set off illegal fireworks over the harbor. At midnight, Nate kissed me in the kitchen under the warm amber light, and I thought, this is what it feels like when someone chooses you on purpose. 6 months later, we moved in together. A year after that, on a cold October night, exactly like the one when he'd first shown up, I asked him to marry me. We were sitting on the couch. There was no ring, no plan, just the two of us and the truth. "Yes," he said immediately. "Obviously, yes." We got married the following spring in my backyard under string lights, with 20 people we loved and a dog we'd adopted together who barked twice during the vows. Claire sent flowers. Mark cried. And when Nate said, "I do," I realized that the best decisions I'd ever made were the ones I hadn't seen coming. So here's my question for you. What would you have done if someone showed up at your door and told you the truth you didn't know you needed to hear? And have you ever been brave enough to want something out loud, even when it scared you? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.